So let's start off with a little meditation. And by the force of our familiarity, see if you can, right off the bat, watching the breathing, try to develop a concentrated state of mind in which you let go of the other distracting thoughts, the discursive thoughts that are coursing through your mind. Just become one with the breathing. Notice that if you let go of paying attention to the tension in your neck or your back, whatever, that has a chance of relaxing. And withdraw your attention to your heart chakra, mental consciousness, the sixth sense. Watching the contents, try to recognize that it could only be present, the various thoughts, if the mind has this clear light nature. Just letting go of whatever thought comes. Try to perceive the mind itself that's cognizing those thoughts, to which those thoughts are appearing. and let go of whatever dawns, whatever color or shape or sound. The entity of my mind has existed since beginningless time, sometimes polluted with very destructive emotions, other times less so, sometimes virtuous, contaminated minds. So also the minds of all living beings, exactly equal with us in wanting to be happy, wanting to be free of suffering. With a mind equalized toward friends, enemies, and strangers, recognizing all living beings as like a wish-fulfilling gem, that can bring about our own welfare, our own aim, and the aim of all others if cultivated. To be alert like that think to develop the higher qualities of the paths, the grounds and so forth, the stages of the path, even to have the correct foundation for the Lanrim realizations, I need to have more clarity, concentration, to understand Buddha's teachings. So for that purpose, I'm engaging in this study, in-depth study of the Buddha's teachings, to overcome my own faults, to become less a burden to others, to become loving and kind, to enhance those, ultimately to have the wisdom to solve ultimately my own delusions, my own problems, the root of all of them, ignorance, grasping to a truly findable self-existence, true existence. Coupled with the altruistic wish that impels us to work for the welfare of others. I think I'm going to participate tonight in order to achieve that ultimate goal of enlightenment. Which I can achieve with this mind, clear light Buddha nature. Mind whose ultimate nature also is, like all phenomena, empty of any true existence. And then relax. Bring your attention back. I think someone's tired over here. Who's? Oh, okay. I heard a lot of yawning. Did you hear? You had good concentration. Okay, so we just had a weekend intensive of a couple of classes. So we've in this class we've already finished much of the first two Hinayana schools of tenets, right? The Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas. So, Leo, without looking, can you just give what is the definition of a Sautrantika, a propounder of Sautrantika tenets?
They believe, well, first of all, they're followers of the Hinayana, and they accept, what's the word? They accept the existence of objects and of persons, I think, both at the same time.
So they're Hinayana practitioners who, you said followers of the Hinayana, which I'm not quite sure what that means. Here there's a difference between a follower or practitioner and someone who is adhering to the tenets. So, because we're talking about the philosophical school, so it's someone who's adhering to those tenets. In Tibetan, this word mawa or vadin in Sanskrit, like Theravadin or Sautrantika doesn't have the word vadin in it, but vadin kind of means propounder, someone who propounds or holds Hinayana tenets, and they accept objects, you said? Who would correct that? What's the distinguishing characteristic? Do you know, Thea? External objects, as opposed to internal objects? Well, the differentiation will come up a bit here when we talk about the Chittamatra school, because they don't accept the existence of external objects. Here, the meaning of external objects is objects that are of a different nature than the mind. Okay, the lower tenets and also the Prasangika, the highest tenets, say definitely there are some things that are a different nature from our mind stream. And in our text also, there was another characteristic of the Chittamatra, of the Sautrantikas. Do you remember? Anyone? They accept self-cognizing or self-knowing awareness, right? And, okay, so we talked a bit about that. And one thing that we didn't go into as much detail on, because a lot of you studied Lorig before, but we'll just sort of review, was their presentation of subjects. Did you study Lorig, sister? Yes. You did? Okay. Clayton ordered the DVDs, but I don't think he's studying. He studied it in theory, I guess. So when we talked about objects, what's the main thing, Venerable, when we talk about objects in the Sautrantika, when we present objects, what's the main thing that they talk about? Or what were the topics that were mentioned here?
In terms of asserting objects? Or?
In one of the outlines is called the mode of asserting objects. Mm-hmm. So what comes up in that topic?
Definition of an object.
Definition of an object. Yeah.
That which performs a function.
That which performs a function. That's not the definition of an object, is it? That's the definition of a thing. But let's say one way of dividing up in which they present objects is they say there are two kinds of objects: ultimate truths and conventional truths. So, what are ultimate truths for the Sautrantikas?
Those which perform a function.
Those which can ultimately perform a function. And conventional truths?
Those which ultimately cannot perform a function.
And do you remember in the other text by Kondruk Jigbe Wangpo what the definition was of for Sautrantika?
Those, is it to do with an ultimate truth is that which is not seen through conceptual image.
Of which truth?
An ultimate truth is that which is not, I'm kind of guessing here, but an ultimate truth is that which is not perceived via a conceptual image.
Something like that. Let's see. The definition of an ultimate truth is a phenomenon that is able to bear reasoned analysis from the point of view of whether it has its own mode of subsistence without depending on imputation. So you could say it's able to be analyzed, withstand analysis that checks whether it is merely imputed with terms and concepts or whether it has its own mode of existence from its own side. They say that ultimate truths can withstand that, and that they say, they do have some kind of real existence, whereas conventional truths are merely imputed by the mind.
So what's the difference between what I said and what's said there?
Okay, what do you think? This sounds like something you would have said to your mom. Isn't that what I said, Mom? What did you say? Do you remember?
I said,
Roll back the recording.
ultimate truth is that which is, I said an ultimate truth is that which is not, which is seen not via
A mental image. Mm-hmm. You couldn't say that because you do see conventional truths via a mental image. You'd have to get around that definition. You can perceive the cup via a mental image. So you can't define it just by, because conception perceives both ultimate truths and conventional truths. Right? Conception can perceive all phenomena. We can perceive all phenomena with conception. We can't perceive, we can't apprehend permanent phenomena, according to the Sautrantikas, things that are conventional truths, with perception. But conceptual mind is capable of knowing all. So you couldn't use that exactly. But what you're saying, it makes, you can see you have some idea behind there. You're thinking that because the objects of conception are permanent phenomena, and permanent phenomena are synonymous with conventional truths, I guess you're using it that way. What if you just said the definition of a conventional phenomena is a permanent phenomena? Wouldn't that have been easier for them? Would that work? Our definition in Jason Truki Kelson's text was talking about an ultimate truth was that which was, a conventional truth was that which was not able to perform a function ultimately. So it would have to be permanent. Because permanent things are not able, according to the Sautrantikas, they're not able to perform a function. Do the Vaibhashikas agree with that? They say every phenomena, existent, permanent or impermanent, can perform a function, like space performs the function of allowing the birds to fly in it, the bunnies to run through it. This is Halloween. Goblins. That's Easter, I'm thinking of. Bunnies. Okay. And also in that section in asserting objects, there's a presentation of the synonyms of, let's say, existence, that which exists. Does anyone remember? Oma, do you remember some of the synonyms of existence? Okay. You don't want to be bothered, okay. Don, do you remember? Just existence, that which is existent. So one of the other one is dharma, so which we translate as phenomena. Phenomena is something that covers both permanent and impermanent things, covers both ultimate truths and conventional truths. Phenomena. And also existent, that which is existent, okay, as opposed to non-existent. So there are permanent existence and impermanent existence. What are some of the other synonyms? Do you remember? That's no, okay. Specifically characterized phenomena, or specifically these specifically characterized. Is that refer to existence in general? What is that? Is it? That's going to be an ultimate truth, which is what? An impermanent phenomena, specifically characterized. So that's not a synonym. What synonyms? Venerable Somo will know back there. I gave two. We said existent and phenomena. What else? Objects. Objects in general don't have to be impermanent, do they? Okay. That's Yule, remember? You'll go to sleep without dinner unless you do the dishes. Mm-hmm. So phenomena, ch or dharma, existence, satyopa, and what did Venerable say? Object. What else? Object of knowledge. That which is to be known. Sheja. That's good. Oops.
Object possessor?
Yes. What is it?
Object possessor, right?
Object possessor. Is that a synonym of existent? No. Object possessor just means subject, and that's a subset. I mean, that as opposed to objects. So that doesn't cover all existence. Well, that's a good start. There's a couple others. What Shelja, object of intellectual measurement, and some other things. How about the synonyms of permanent phenomena? We have takpa, permanent. What else? Pat, do you remember any of the other things? That was just permanent? You had said something before, I think. Or no, Don had said.
Compounded phenomena.
That's permanent? Compounded?
Generally characterized.
Wait a second now. Permanent phenomena are compounded?
No, I said, what did I say? I said compounded phenomena.
I'm asking for synonyms of permanent. Duh. Okay, so that's a synonym of impermanent, right? So uncompounded, like uncompounded space. So you could say the uncompounded dumache. Which one?
Especially characterized phenomena.
That's a synonym, specifically or specially characterized is synonym of permanent?
Again.
No, that's a synonym of it should be generally characterized phenomena. So permanent, generally characterized phenomena, the uncompounded, ultimate truth. Not for the Sautrantikas. We're talking about the Sautrantikas. The uncompounded is going to be a conventional truth for them, Venerable. We're talking about the Sautrantikas. Upper tenets, something that's permanent is going to be an ultimate truth. Even for the Vaibhashikas, it looked like some things that were permanent were ultimate truths. But here it's something which is permanent it's going to be a conventional truth. Okay? So the generally characterized, conventional truth, permanent, uncompounded. Was there another? Falsely existent, okay. And how...
Falsely, I was going to ask this question earlier. How does falsely existent and ultimate truth almost seem to imply a contradiction in terms?
So here, this is really important. This is a good point. So when we talk about... when we talk about the upper tenet, when we talk about the Prasangika, let's say the Madhyamaka school, the ultimate truth, is that truly existent? No, not necessarily. I say not necessarily not. No, it's everything, whether it exists or doesn't exist, anything is not truly existent, non-truly existent. So it's not a synonym of ultimate truth. Here, truly existent and falsely existent are being used in a particular way. Truly, phenomena are according to the lower tenets, they don't talk about the emptiness of true existence, as is talked about in the Madhyamaka school. They say all phenomena are truly, well, let's say the Vaibhashikas would say all phenomena are truly existent. Here, some phenomena are truly existent, some are falsely existent. For them, some things that are just imputed by the mind don't exist the way, in any kind of true way. So they're falsely existent. Whereas all of the impermanent phenomena, all of the ultimate truths are truly existent, right? So is that right? Ultimate truths, conventional things?
Truly existent?
Are they truly existent? No? The ultimate things? That is impermanent phenomena? They are truly existent for the Sautrantika.
Oh, yes, for the Churinoff.
Yeah. But the things that are permanent are falsely existent. So, okay, so that's another. So then there were some there was a set of synonyms in this thing about the presentation of objects of impermanent phenomena. What were some of the synonyms of the impermanent? Well, you had some of them. You could just think, impermanent. What kind of truth is it? Ultimate truth, right? Truly existent, compounded. Yeah, those specifically characterized phenomena. Okay. Okay. So that was in the section on asserting objects. And then in the section asserting, and they're about their assertions, what they hold, their position about subjects. And we said that there are, the three kinds of subjects. There are persons, articulate sounds, and consciousnesses. And so we talked about persons being, they, according to the Sautrantikas, you could either give an example. According to those who were followers of Scripture, I guess, the example of the person was what? I'm in the Chittamatra section here. Do you remember? Continuum of the aggregates as opposed to the mere collection of the aggregates, as the Vaibhashikas were saying. So it's quite similar. And what was the other kind? Those who were followers of reasoning said it was the mental consciousness we could find as an example of the person. And then we talked about, let me get to the right section here. I didn't think there was any, was there something about sound here?
Yes.
What did it say? At the end or at the beginning? That section. Oh yeah. At the end, on page 9. And at the bottom of page 8, I guess. No? No? Page 9.
Kind of like a mind apprehending sound as impermanent.
Generally, there are three divisions of object possessor, subjects: beings, persons, speech, and consciousness. Object possessing valid objects can be divided into three: valid persons, valid speech, and valid consciousness. An example of the first is said to be Shakyamuni Buddha. An example of the second is said to be the Dharma wheel of the Four Truths. So that's an example of a subject of a valid speech. And the third is valid direct perceiver and valid direct and valid inferential cognizer. But it didn't mention here about at the beginning, in terms of subjects, about or did it? says A here. It just talks about valid cognizers and the example of a person. Okay. So we did say some of the things we know already. The definition of mind or awareness is that which is clear and knowing. And if you divide awareness here, there are two kinds: valid cognizers, pramana, and non-valid cognizers. So last time we talked a little bit in detail about the valid cognizers. Are you following? What's your name back there? Betty. Are you following? Yeah? Okay. So the sense of a valid consciousness, a valid knower, a valid cognition is one that not only realizes its object, but according to the Sautrantikas and all of the lower tenets, it has to be fresh, has to be new. So we talked a bit about that, different kinds. And then of the non-realizing, or the non-valid cognizers, how many were there? Some of the low-rank people, Mark would know for sure. If there are two kinds of, pardon? There are two kinds of valid cognizers. How many, remember how many ways of knowing there were that we studied in low-rank? 7. So that would leave?
5.
Very good. So there are 5 non-valid cognizers. How many of them are all of them, do all of them not realize their object? Do some of them realize their object?
Some of them do.
Which one does, or which ones do?
Subsequent cognizers do.
Exactly. Subsequent cognizers realize their objects. How about the rest of them? Anything else realize their object? Well, let's see what they are. What are those 5? One of them is subsequent cognitions, because of the valid cognitions, we had valid direct perceivers and valid inference. And now you're bringing up, of the non-valid ones, the first, which is, or if we put it in this order, the first that realizes still is a subsequent cognition. What else is left?
Inattentive?
Inattentive perceptions. Do they realize their object?
No.
No.
Wrong consciousness?
Wrong consciousness obviously doesn't realize its object.
Doubt?
Doubt.
Uh,
Doing well.
I think I'm going to have to stop there.
Okay. I'm going to have to stop there. I don't want to overload you with information. What's the 5th one? Correct assumption or presumption, correct belief. The kind of consciousness that we might have. Most of what we feel are maybe insights or realizations, perhaps, even if they're right, may be no more than correct beliefs. Believing that there are future lives and so forth, that Buddha is a perfect refuge and so forth. We haven't really solidified that with firm reasons. So here we had there are 5 divisions: subsequent cognizers, wrong consciousness, doubt, correct assumption, and inattentive perception. The definition of a subsequent cognizer is a cognizer that realizes what has already been realized. So it's subsequent. There are 2 divisions: conceptual subsequent cognizers and non-conceptual. How can that be? How can you have, Clayton, how could you have a conceptual subsequent cognizer? Can you realize something with conception?
Couldn't answer that question.
Pardon?
I couldn't answer that question.
You couldn't in the past, or you can't? You mean? Oh, you can't.
Nor in the past.
Okay.
In the future, perhaps.
Conceptually, like,
Carrie, what do you think?
Can you repeat the question?
I was trying to force Clayton's mind to work a little bit. Here it says there are 2 kinds of subsequent cognizers: those that are conceptual and those that are non-conceptual, perceptual. So I sort of acting I don't know what it's called, the devil's advocate or something here. And I said, well, how could that be? Because how could you have it says a subsequent cognizer realizes that which has already been realized. How could you have a conceptual consciousness realizing something? Is that possible? Doesn't only perception realize?
No, I think there's very hidden truths out there, if I'm using the right noun, that we cannot perceive, but we can conceive of. So we can conceptually.
Oh, come on, guys, this is easy. You know this. It's not. Come on. I thought you'd know this one really easy. There are two kinds of realizing consciousness. We can realize via perception. We can realize things. And we can realize with inference. Remember, inferential cognition is one of the valid ways of knowing. It can actually realize its object. So unlike some materialistic systems, or maybe we call hedonists of the world, who say the only thing that's real is what you can see and taste and touch, and smell. Everything else is just, people's opinion or conception, The Buddha taught that there are phenomena. Well, first of all, you can realize phenomena with conception, some of the external phenomena, but you can realize some kind of hidden phenomena. Maybe that's a little bit what Carrie was recalling. You can realize things like subtle impermanence and emptiness, selflessness, other kinds of things with the mental consciousness. You can realize them, actually know them perfectly, eliminate superimpositions that your mind has encrusted upon them, projections of your mind, eliminate misconceptions about them. It's not the same as directly perceiving them with the mental consciousness, these kinds of important truths or important concepts, but it's an avenue to lead to that. Without having that intellectual step, understanding things intellectually, conceptually, you'll never be able to have a direct perception of them as we understand in the system. Okay? Does that make sense, Venerable? So you should have all gone, come on, of course you can realize things. With subsequent cognizers are conceptual and non-conceptual. Of course there are conceptual subsequent cognizers. They're the moments subsequent to realizing something with conception, such as the moments subsequent to inferential cognition. Okay? Also, if you've realized something with the sense consciousness, and later, if you have a remembering consciousness of that, which is conceptual, is that not a realizing consciousness? What do you think, Diana? It doesn't have to be only in this, the subsequent moments of inference that's a realizing consciousness, a subsequent cognizer. Also, you can have, what if you have a remembering consciousness of what you perceived with your sense consciousnesses perceptually, or say you had that also is, I think we studied in Lorig, and if you think about it, that's also a kind of subsequent cognizer. So the mind, conceptual mind, is very, very important. It can know things. So those are two divisions of subsequent cognizers. In fact, it says here, example of the first, that is conceptual subsequent cognizers, are remembering consciousnesses. Remembering blue means the color blue, not that you were disappointed, or that is generated by being induced by a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue. It's exactly what we were saying. And the second moment of an inferential cognizer realizing sound as impermanent. Okay, who did well? Diana did well in Lorik. So, is there such a thing as according to Purbachok, remember our other text, is there such a thing as a second moment of subsequent cognition, a second moment of inference?
A second moment of inference?
Because here, at least as it's translated, I didn't look at this point at the text, it says the example is an example of the second, and the second moment of an inferential cognizer realizing sound as impermanent.
inferential cognition.
Anyone? Remember, according to Purbachok, if it's an inference, it had to be generated in dependence on a correct sign. So the subsequent cognizer was no longer called an inference. It was subsequent cognizer induced by an inference, was realizing what the inference had realized. So if it, according to certain kind of tenets, if it's an inferential cognizer, it has to be a prime cognition. Okay, anyway, some subtle, yeah, definitely.
Regarding non-conceptual subsequent cognizers,
Non-conceptual, okay, that means perceptual, right? Right.
Non-conceptual subsequent. Would you also say a non-conceptual subsequent cognizer is one which, after an inference, after you've had an inferential cognition, then the next moment is a non-conceptual subsequent cognizer, is that correct?
Is that good? That's an interesting...
If you, for example, you have an inference...
Okay, so we have an first of all, you have a conceptual mind, you inferred the existence of fire where there was smoke, for instance, okay? Then?
And then the second moment is, would that be a non-conceptual subsequent cognizer?
Why would that be non-conceptual? You're talking about something with your mental consciousness. So you're thinking that that second moment, you would know it non-conceptually. You'd have a direct perception, mental direct perception of that. Well, you could, I mean, indeed, the sequence, say, of realizing emptiness or selflessness is that you would have a conceptual understanding, and then when the mental image of that dissipated and disappeared, you'd have a direct perception. But in general, a mental direct perception is not going to be subsequent to a mental, say, an inferential cognizer, a mental conscious.
The question was referring to specifically to emptiness. When you get the inferential cognition, then because it's through a mental image, the second moment would be non-conceptual.
Not necessarily. There might be eons that you. I don't know if you would necessarily. You might spend eons, having realized emptiness conceptually before you have a direct perception. Because in the Bodhisattva path, as is presented in these tenets and also in the Mahayana, a person might have a realization, a conceptual realization, even on the path of accumulation. On the path of preparation, they could have a realization where there's a union of shine and lactone, of tranquil abiding, penetrative insight on emptiness, both of those being conceptual, but that might take one countless great eon on the path of accumulation. So you haven't had a direct perception yet. That direct perception, which follows in the aftermath of a inference, is something that takes a long time to build up the merit to be able to perceive and to eliminate, other kinds of hindering things.
I just realised that I meant to say conceptual. I was meaning conceptual. When you have emptiness.
Okay, say.
When you're trying to realise emptiness and you get this inference, which is valid.
Yes.
An inferential cognition. Then the second moment would be a conceptual subsequent cognizer because the object is conceptual.
It's a conceptual subsequent cognizer,
That's
right?
what I actually
Okay,
meant.
that's what you're.
Sorry.
Okay. So, so sounds much better. Okay. Then the definition of a wrong consciousness. Here, this is the word lokshe. I can't remember what the Sanskrit is. Lokshe could be called, because there's a lot of words, like sometimes we say mistaken, deceiving, or deceived. Here, wrong is a different word completely. Lokshe. Lokshe sometimes is translated as perverted consciousness, or what else is it translated as? Anyone know? Lokshe, wrong consciousness, is a cognizer that engages its object incorrectly. Pardon?
Can you say harming, or is that not?
Which one?
Could you say harming consciousness? No, you wouldn't.
Harming consciousness?
Incorrect consciousness.
Harming consciousness, incorrect consciousness. I'm not sure. You have to check. It engages its object how? Incorrectly. Okay. You have to check what the Tibetan is. It has two divisions, conceptual wrong consciousness and non-conceptual wrong consciousness. Thea, without looking, what's a non-conceptual wrong consciousness?
A non-conceptual
This is
wrong
for
consciousness.
Sister Thea.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask Brother Leo in a second.
That's quite all right.
Leo,
You're gonna
Leo,
have to ask me.
Leo, Leo.
Thea
Leo.
and Theo and Leo.
Leo.
Okay. Quite clever.
Non-conceptual wrong,
Wrong consciousness.
consciousness.
Is there such a thing, or do non-conceptual consciousnesses, are they always right consciousnesses? Do they always engage their objects correctly? Or look at is it Mark back then?
My mind is going to the doubting.
Oh, you're
doubting
okay.
mind. Okay.
You're developing one of the ways of knowing called doubting consciousness. Or is it confusion? Is it doubt? Doubt? Okay.
No doubt.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean,
So you're not sure if it's doubt leaning in the right direction or not because you don't know what
Right.
the answer is, right? Okay.
okay.
So is it Mark back there behind Thea? Is that your name? I forgot. So what you were shaking your hand. So can you give an example of a non-conceptual wrong consciousness?
I think an eye that has veil in it sees the wrong color.
An eye which has bile in it sees the wrong color.
There's no-
So to be more here's sort of like precise in the terminology, an eye consciousness which is affected by some cause of error, such as in the basis itself, would be a wrong consciousness. Because we don't talk about just the eye, we differentiate between the eye and the eye consciousness. So I think you're absolutely right. That's an example. Okay, so there are sense consciousnesses that are can be wrong consciousnesses. Yeah? And how about conceptual consciousness? Is that impossible to be a wrong consciousness? No, there's lots. Right? Here's now Leo's turn. What's a conceptual wrong consciousness? Do you have any idea of that?
Yeah, just about every thought that I have.
I won't make any judgment about that. Engages this object incorrectly. So you mean that means if you think Folger's coffee is good, that's a wrong consciousness, or what?
Well,
That's not what's meant by wrong consciousness. So
if I perceive, well, I'm a Mahayanist now, and I perceive this to be permanent. That
okay, that would be a wrong consciousness.
I think so.
Perceiving it or conceiving it?
Conceiving of it
Conceiving
as
it.
being permanent,
So this is
right.
interesting. You said I'm a Mahayanist now.
Right.
Okay, what is it? Okay, I just get down to the nitty gritty here. What is a Mahayanist? You say you're a Mahayanist. What is a Mahayanist?
My understanding is that they would look at this object and they would see it to be both impermanent and essentially empty. They wouldn't see it in the same way as a Sautronicus would see it.
Now wait a second. What is it? You said I am a Mahayanist now. What makes you a Mahayanist? What does that mean, a Mahayanist? Because we're differentiating here. We're being careful about terminology.
Sure.
We say that there are people who are upholding or following certain tenets, the propounders, that's like the definitions, and those who are practitioners, you know, who are actually engaging in the practices of some school.
And
So when you say you're a Mahayanist, that means you're an actual, you have entered the Mahayana path, because that's the definition of a Mahayanist is someone who has entered into the Mahayana path. Who's entered into the Mahayana path?
Yes,
So are you a Bodhisattva?
trying to be. Yes.
So does that constitute being a Bodhisattva? So there's a lot of discussion about this. We've talked about it on other occasions in some of the other courses. In some situations, some people say, in some even in some Tibetan traditions, they say if you take bodhisattva vows, you're a bodhisattva. But there's a lot of haziness about that. If you wanted to be more precise, at least from the Gelugpa point of view, you couldn't say that simply taking bodhisattva vows, or maybe sort of deciding, I'm going to be taking bodhisattva vows means before the Buddhas and bodhisattvas, or before a guru. But maybe you might even just think, I've recited this verse by myself, or I've decided to become a bodhisattva. That's not enough to really say that one is a bodhisattva. The distinguishing characteristic is to have generated within one's mind stream a particular, very special mind called bodhicitta, which is spontaneous. You could even debate whether, if there are instances of developing bodhicitta with effort, as we try to do now, we have some semblance of developing bodhicitta with effort when we meditate on the Lanrim, and we use a lot of, try to overcome our self-cherishing thought, and we develop maybe for some instance a sense of bodhicitta. Maybe at that moment we're not a bodhisattva either, because that's not spontaneous bodhicitta. So from a certain perspective, to say I'm a Mahayanist would imply that one has spontaneous bodhicitta. If you say I'm a holder of Mahayana tenets, I'm that would make more sense somehow. Okay.
Most of us have to keep taking the vow over.
And even if we take the vow over and over again, doesn't mean that we have become a Mahayanist. It's not like I tease in Singapore. I should have teased in Taiwan also. That it's not because the Singaporeans. Is it Venerable? Did the Singaporean identity card have the religion on it? No, I thought it did. One of the cards. And sometimes the people have in their, they'll say I'm a Buddhist, religion Buddhist, and I joke that it's not enough that you are a Buddhist or a Mahayanist simply to have it on your identity card, or that your mother was Buddhist. I think in Judaism, if your mother is Jew, you're Jew, right? And it's not enough, these different kinds of things. You actually have to develop a certain kind of mind. That's why Buddhists are called inner beings. There's some kind of inner dimension, inner definition. So let's just continue on a little bit before we take a little break. Examples. We had different kinds of wrong consciousness. There's not an awful lot of elaboration here. Definition of doubt is a mental factor that by its own power hesitates with regard to two alternatives. That's a pretty good definition. Some people would say, according to this text and according to Purbachok's text, the doubt, which is one of these ways of knowing, is a mental factor, right? But remember, we said that some people say that a more comprehensive way would be not to restrict it to being a mental factor. The doubt could, just the general mind of doubt, which not just by its own power, but by the power of the mental factor, doubt is hesitating, is vacillating with respect to two alternatives. A mental consciousness and an accompanying feeling that have the 5 concomitances, they share 5 similarities with doubt, are not that which is by its own power, are not that which, by its own power, wavers with regard to the two alternatives, because they waver with regard to the two alternatives by the power of the mental factor, doubt. So they would not fit this definition of doubt. They're not mental factors. But from some points of view, they would be called doubt. There's doubting consciousness. So it's some kind of little debate about that. The 3 divisions of doubt: that which tends to the factual, that which tends to not tending to the factual, which is going in the wrong direction, and that which is So equally balanced. So Sister Thea's doubt a little while ago, she wasn't sure which one that was. Okay? So example, if you think maybe sound is impermanent. Actually, this is not so much a good translation. I think that the Tibetan would be more like, sound is probably impermanent, isn't it? Here it says maybe sound is impermanent. That could also be the thought in the mind. Maybe it isn't, probably isn't. So just to say maybe isn't certain so much the flavor. The doubt that leaning in the right direction would mean maybe I don't know. It might be impermanent. Maybe it's permanent. But probably just tending a little more toward the correct would be called this doubt leaning in the right direction. And then thinking that sound is permanent would be a doubt leaning in the wrong direction. That is doubting. Maybe it's permanent, maybe it's impermanent. Well, come on, it's probably permanent. Let's get on with it. Let's go out and have a pizza, come on. Example of the third is doubt that thinks sound is either permanent or impermanent. Well, that's all of them. All of them think sound is either permanent or impermanent. I didn't check today the Tibetan here. It's thinking, I don't know. It's permanent or impermanent? I don't know. Completely equally balanced doubt. The definition of correct assumption is a conceiving consciousness, conceiving cognizer, that accords with what is correct, but is controvertible in conceiving its object. A lot of heavy words there. What do you think, Pat? What does that mean? Conceiving consciousness means what? Can that be an eye consciousness?
No, that'd be a mental consciousness.
Has to be mental. Conceiving means it's conceptual, right?
Right.
So it's knowing, it's thinking about something in terms of a mental image. It's conceiving cognizer.
But it agrees with what is correct.
Okay.
But is controvertible in
Okay,
conceiving its object.
What does controvertible mean here?
You could argue it either way.
That's maybe what it means in law or something? I don't know. Here, lua.
In Elise it does.
In Elise, yeah. This is controvertible. I thought that was the kind of. I thought that's what you took over to the Skyline Cinema over there. Oh, that's a convertible. Okay. Controvertible. Here, this is the Tibetan word lua, which you could say is deceived. Controvertible is just another way of translating that. Not exactly the word mistaken, or you could say mistaken, but it doesn't have, usually the word mistaken, trulwa is a word, in another context, it means mistaken with respect to the appearing object. Controvertible or deceived means it hasn't realized the object.
So give an example.
Give an example of what? Of a correctly assuming consciousness? For me to assume when the mind is very... Okay, that is for me to assume or to have the presumption that all phenomena are not truly existent, non-truly existent, that all phenomena are empty of true existence. I don't have a realization of that in my continuum. Maybe sometimes gets... might be, sometimes gets close. To have a realization of that, it would have to either be a direct perception or an inferential cognition, right? To have an inferential cognition of emptiness, where you have, by a logical reasoning, you've realized and really determined to yourself, proved to yourself, incontrovertibly, that phenomena are empty of true existence, that would be a very, a state of mind that had been cultivated with a lot of effort. What we might talk about insight now, or a lot of confidence. A person might have confidence in certain things, even bravado, this is the way it is. most of that, if it accords with the fact, is no more than correct assumption, because it's not based on correct reasoning or direct perception when we're talking about just, these conceptual understandings. So we might have now in our continuum a correct belief about how to relate with a spiritual guide, or that certain kind of activities have certain kind of karmic results and so forth, but it may not be based on actual...
Might be based on presumption.
On presumption, as opposed to it is presumption, you could say, or you could say, I guess the way that we use it in English, you could say it's based on presumption. It's not based on an actual logical delineation in our own mind, seeing the consequences. If this is so, if all phenomena are non-truly existent because they are dependent arisings, let's say, if you know that. Or as we talked in class the other day, the self that appears to my mind as truly existent does not exist in that way. This object, at first identifying the object of negation, that was the first step, right? Then recognizing that if it did exist that way, it would have to either be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different from the aggregates. Remember in the class the other day we talked about the importance of this concept of one or difference. Do you remember with you? And then developing in your mind, spending some time to recognize the pervasion, that if something existed, it would have to be, that's the second step, that it'd have to be either one with the aggregates, inherently one with the aggregates, or inherently different from the aggregates. And then checking and seeing that it is not, there would be incredible contradictions to many levels of logic and direct perception if the self were one with the aggregates, and there would be other contradictions if it was inherently different than the aggregates. Then on the basis of that, when that is set in the mind, it is possible to have a inferential cognition. So let's see if we can, let's take a little break and have some direct perception of tea or trick or treats. I think Don brought some treats, no tricks hopefully, leftover treats. So this is good. There's now a new cup here because I wasn't able to find in one of the other classes the midpoint in the tape. I had to just go chick, chick, chick. Now I can see there's a cup here. Okay. If you were to look at the video, when the middle of the video, I put some chapter markers right at that point. Okay, so correct assumption or presumption or correct belief is what we're talking. This is one of the kinds of divisions. Like say, for instance, here there are 5 divisions that are given. Correct beliefs or presumptions without a reason, such as sound is impermanent. You just believe without any kind of reason. God is supreme. George Bush is right. Texas has never executed a person who is actually innocent. Excuse me, I get carried away sometimes. Do you remember that one, the interview in the Oprah show, and George Bush said she said, what about the people that were executed, that were innocent? He said, there was never anyone in Texas who was ever executed who was innocent. It's just like, that's not even a correct belief, is it, first of all? But it's certainly based on, without a reason. It's not even based on a reason. Say, for instance, if you based on a reason, if you had a correct understanding, but you didn't have a reason for it, that would just be a presumption. Here's another one: indefinite reason, or let's say, or the sign, without a reason, correct assumption with a contradictory reason. Contradictory reason would be what, Venerable? I thought you were going to, from your own memory.
Something that contradicts.
Sound is impermanent because it's not a product. Or you could say, sound is impermanent. That's the thesis, so that's kind of believing. That would be the correct part. You couldn't say sound is permanent because it's a product. That wouldn't be a correct belief, because sound is not permanent, right? But to believe that sound is impermanent because it's not a product, because it's you can't produce it, that would be contradictory, because that reason actually is contradictory to being a product. Correct assumption with an indefinite reason. So what's the example here? A mind apprehending sound is impermanent by the sign of being a measurable object. This is one of the synonyms of knowable object. Object of intellectual measurement, you might say, shelja. This is an example of a correct assumption with an indefinite reason, because being a measurable object is uncertain, you could say. It's another way of translating indefinite. Uncertain reason to establish sound is impermanent. Just because something is an object of knowledge, like say, the sky is blue because it's impermanent. Is that proof that the sky is blue?
No.
First of all, let's say that's a correct belief, right? The sky is blue. Right. I mean, in the sense of terminology we usually use, right? Sky is blue. So that might be a correct belief. But what if you ask the person, you say, why is it blue? Is it, well, because it's impermanent. But is that a reason that proves, is the sky impermanent, first of all? It's not a wrong fact. It's not a wrong statement, is it? But that's not a reason which, how do you say? There's no pervasion, you could say. Just because it's impermanent doesn't mean that it's blue. There are impermanent things that are yellow. There are impermanent things that are red. There are impermanent things that have no color.
So an indefinite reason means an incorrect deduction, or is it more narrow than that?
No, it means that the reason that you have given in a logical sign is not certain to indicate that particular predicate, that thesis. Okay. In other words, one of the things is, let's say, there's no pervasion. Just because something is impermanent doesn't mean that it is blue. What was the example that was given here? An object of intellectual measurement. Let's say, we'll use a different one. Sound isn't permanent because it exists. And then first you check. Let's say, sound isn't permanent. Okay, he's right there. Okay. And then you check the sign because it exists. Does sound exist? Sound isn't permanent because it exists. Yeah, you have the property of the subject. Yeah, sounds like a good reason. No, it's not. Because the fact that something exists is not sufficient that it is impermanent. There are things that exist that are permanent also.
So it's a correct assumption, but it's not completely deductive to the extent that it gets you where you want to go.
Yeah, you have to think about it a bit. There are other kinds here. Another one was a correct assumption with an inapplicable reason. What does it mean there? A mind apprehending sound is impermanent by the sound of by the sign of it being an object of apprehension of eye consciousness. Inapplicable reason. I'm not sure what the Tibetan was. That's one that we would say the sign is not established. The subject is not, sound is not an object of eye consciousness. And then the fifth one here, a mind apprehending sound is impermanent by the sound product, but in the continuum of a person who has not determined or ascertained with valid cognition that sound is impermanent. Sound is impermanent is an example of a correct... Oh, I see. They have not yet realized that sound is impermanent, is an example of a correct assumption with a correct but unestablished reason. Because although product is a correct sign to establish that sound is impermanent, that correct sign has not been established for that person. So just to have the correct sign, sound is impermanent because it's a product. And even to have that kind of correct belief based on that sign, if you haven't yet realized that sound is a product and that anything that is a product is necessarily impermanent, and actually realized, until you've actually developed that inferential cognizer, it's still a correct assumption up until that moment.
Wouldn't that reasoning make you have a inferential
Headache?
cognizer about it? I mean,
Mm-hmm. So a correct assumption, correct assumption is going to precede a inferential cognizer, right? You're believing it. That's why you're engaging in this analysis. Sound is impermanent. All phenomena are empty because they're dependent arising, blah, blah, blah.
but wouldn't that reasoning cause one to have a inferential cognition of it?
It could, if you pursued it and understood all of the elements of it. But simply, how does it say? A mind apprehending sound as impermanent by the sign product, that is apprehending, perceiving that sound is impermanent. This is the correct belief. In the continuum of a person who has not ascertained with valid cognition that sound is impermanent. They have not yet had that valid cognition. So many different examples of the person before the moment in which they actually have that valid cognition, that inferential cognizer. Those are all correct beliefs or presumptions or correct assumptions. Okay. The definition of an inattentive perception, literally what it is, this is how people have come to translate it, is a consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained. So that means you cannot later develop, because it was not ascertained, means the mental consciousness did not pay sufficient attention to later induce a remembering consciousness of having perceived it. It's called we could call it an inattentive perception, or a consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained. So the definition is a non-mistaken cognizer to which an object appears clearly, but which does not ascertain its object. That's pretty simple. Okay, so how about this? Let me ask Venerable here. Have I asked? I haven't asked people over here. Vimal, can I ask you some questions, or would you? You're hiding a little. Okay, so this one, which is inattentive perception. Say, for instance, when my mental consciousness is trying to watch the breathing, but is distracted into, thinking about the Santa Cruz beach, or, how nice it would be to be with someone or something. Is that, and so then the breathing goes on for some time and is not ascertained. Is that an example of inattentive perception?
Yes.
What do you think, Diana? She's thinking. Yes. So I'm trying to do meditation, breathing meditation, but my mind is distracted to some, it's because of attachment. I start daydreaming, and the breathing has gone on.
An example, because if you were paying attention to the breathing, it has to be a perception and a conceptual, but you could have a perception of, like, even the tactile sensation of feeling the air going
right
in your nostrils. So you'd be inattentive to that perception.
Right, you could be
like
inattentive
tactile.
to that by paying attention. The usual example is that you're paying attention to some other sense, right? Like, yeah, like say for instance, the guy's watching the football game. Here's a classic example. The guy's watching the football game, and his girlfriend or his wife says, "Dear, dinner's ready."
He doesn't even hear it.
It's just, he's just watching. There's a touchdown. Joe Montana's just come out of retirement, thrown the So, of course, the person is, they're going to be, their mental consciousness is totally paying attention to that and is oblivious of some of the other senses. Can it be that you're oblivious of one of the senses because you're thinking about something? Would that be inattentive perception? What do you think, Georgie? Say, for instance, you were asked to be a guard. You were watching something, and you were daydreaming. Your eyes were open. The person came right by, sort of looked around, picked up what you were supposedly guarding, walked off with it, and you're just thinking of, your sweetie or something like that. Is that an example of inattentive perception?
I would think so, yeah.
The job loss.
Maybe, yeah. Former guard, Georgie. Okay. So it has 3 divisions. Is that on the right page? Right, 8. Inattentive perception has 3 divisions. Sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, and self-cognizing direct perceivers that are inattentive. So you can go through those. Generally, there are 3 divisions of subjects: beings, articulate speech, and consciousness. Okay, so we finished that. Now, the 6th section, mode of asserting selflessness. The Sautrantikas assert a selflessness of persons that is the emptiness of a permanent, partless, and independent person. That's what they call the gross selflessness of persons. And a subtle selflessness of persons that is the emptiness of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. We mentioned that before. Like the Vaibhashikas, they do not assert a selflessness of phenomena. So unlike the Mahayana schools, they say that other phenomena other than the self do have a self. They do have a self-identity. They can be found, like the aggregates. We mentioned that before. And in terms of the presentation of the grounds and paths, I think I might have said something wrong the other day here. When holders of the 3 lineages collect merit, they do so on all 4 learning paths. It is by reason of that a Buddha's form aggregate is asserted to be Buddha. So here, I think I said the other day that the other tenets believe... Oh, no, I guess that's true. So when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree for the Vaibhashikas, he had accumulated merit only on the path of accumulation. Right? And that in that one meditative session, he entered into the path of preparation and achieved the path of seeing, and the path of noble learning, became Buddha. So he only accumulated merit on the path of accumulation.
Is that preparation? No?
Pardon?
It only accumulated merit up to the path of preparation.
On the path of accumulation, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said when he sat under the Bodhi tree, he was still in the path of preparation, and then when he...
I think he was on the path of accumulation.
Once he went on to the Bodhi
I
tree.
believe so, yeah. So, let me just read here. I think there's a section in Geshe Sopa's commentary to this. Oh, yes, there's some other interesting things here. Oh, this is on page 245, 246, 247, around there. They make a presentation. This is the grounds and paths. They make a presentation of the 5 paths. They assert that all 16 moments of the 8 paths of forbearance and the 8 paths of knowledge are paths of seeing. So this is, we didn't talk about this before. The Vaibhashikas say that only the first 15 instants of the 16 instants are the path of seeing. This is something we can go into later. This is something we talked about also. Because the appearing object of direct perception must be a specifically characterized object, right? The appearing object of direct perception must be a specifically characterized object. It has to be impermanent. The proponents of sutra, the Sautrantikas, do not assert that the subtle selflessness of persons is the object of the mode of apprehension by the uninterrupted path of a hearer's or anyone's path of seeing. They say that's not what is the object which is actually being, how to say, that's not the object of the mode of apprehension which is synonymous with the appearing object, right? This is because they assert that the subtle selflessness of persons is realized implicitly by hearers and so forth through explicit comprehension of the compositional factor, the mental and physical aggregates that are devoid of a self of persons. So what the person is realizing, we talked about this the other day, it's nothing new, the impermanent aggregates, and they realize implicitly the selflessness, which is a permanent phenomenon, because it doesn't appear to them directly. But that's not what I'm looking for here. I was trying to find about the, I thought there was something here about when they collected merit on the learning paths, but maybe that's not here. Maybe that's in another text.
I think 246.
246, sorry.
At the bottom.
It does say.
I'm not sure if that's what you
In the chapter in Great Exposition School,
want. And then go to the top, it talks about the Buddha jewel.
therefore they assert that the body is not a Buddha jewel, although it is Buddha. Hence, it seems to contradict itself by saying the assertion of the proponents is sutra that the form aggregate of Buddha is Buddha, but not Shiva. No, that's not. Anyway, I'll try to find that other thing. One other sort of contradictory thing between the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas is that the Sautrantikas say that there are certain kinds of arhats who can fall from the state of becoming arhat. Did you know that, Venerable? Someone? Vaibhashikas believe that you could become an arhat, but then if you're not of sharp faculty, if you're not a sharp arhat, you could actually fall from that. From the Sautrantikas say that's impossible, that if someone has achieved arhatship, they have achieved cessation, which is irreversible. They can't fall from that. Okay. So let's, I'll mention something more about the Sautrantikas later, but for the sake of continuing on, let's begin now the next of the tenets, the first of the Mahayana tenets that are presented here, the Chittamatra school. In Tibetan, we say Semsamba. What's it in Sanskrit? It's a really tough one. Chittamatra. Chittamatra is a Sanskrit word. Huh? Gears were turning in Clayton's head. Also, they're also called by other names. They're not only called Chittamatra. This is the school that was the trailblazer of which was whom? Do you know, Venerable Sophia? Who was the person who expounded about the Chittamatra school? Asanga, right? Asanga, who went to Tushita heaven and had a vision, met Maitreya, and when he was doing retreat and received teachings from him, and presented the tenets from the sutras, took from the Buddha's teachings and Maitreya's texts, and expounded on this system. In some of the texts, they don't use the word Chittamatra so much. They use the word Yogacara. Have you heard that term? Mm-hmm. Yogacara? What does that mean?
Yogacharya? Or is that different?
Yogacharya. What does that mean? Yogacharya. Yogacharya is means yogic activity, practitioners of yogic activity. Actually, all of the Buddhists are practitioners of yogic activity. In Buddhism, what does yoga refer to? Does it mean this? Is that yoga? What is it? Do you know what the word yoga comes from? Do you know that?
means one with.
Union?
Union with, yeah.
Yeah, it's a Sanskrit word, yoga, and it's related to our Indo-European word yoke, like yoking the two oxen together, so unifying two things. And so in Tibetan, the word yoga was translated as Neljor. So one of the there may be other etymologies, but my teachers have said what that jorwa, like when we talk about the path of preparation or the path of connection, we call it jorlam. Jorwa means to prepare or connect. Nel, one of the meanings of Nel and Neljor means the authentic. So it means joining with that which is authentic. So I think that's a very good, that's kind of the meaning of yoga. Yoga is not a physical enterprise. I mean, there are different kinds of hatha yoga. There are different kinds of yoga in the Indian traditions. Hatha yoga has to do with certain kinds of outer behaviors. But yoga itself doesn't only have to be a physical kind of thing.
So you say that again, joining one
With what is authentic. Nel in Tibetan means the authentic or the real, joining with the real. So it refers to basically different kinds of meditations when you're trying to bring your mind, your understanding into union with what is authentic. I think that's very similar to what a friend of mine, a Christian Catholic priest, who had studied at Columbia. Actually, I think he wrote his thesis on Milarepa in the theological seminary. Anyway, he was a little bit kind of a, not hippie priest, what would you call, sort of avant-garde or something? Ecumenical? Okay, there you go. He said that the word for in the Christian tradition for meditation, usually they mean something different by meditation. The word that they use that's similar to what we call meditation is contemplation. And he said he believed the etymology of that from the Latin was contemplare, was to join together with, con, the plan of the temple of God in heaven. Contemplar. So I thought, that is exactly like Neljor, joining together with the authentic, or the temple of, the plan means the plan, God's plan, or that which is authentic and beautiful and so forth. So I thought that was very nice. So they're sometimes called the Yogacara, the Chittamatra. Sometimes it's called the, is mistranslated here sometimes, the Vijnana Vadin. Have you heard that before? Vijnana means what? Is the word for consciousness. Chitta means what? Mind, like sem. Vijnana is what we translated as shepa or namshe or namrik. So Vijnana Vadin means propounders of, like we say, Theravadin, or, you know, so propounders of consciousness. So sometimes we call it propounders of consciousness, means everything is of the nature of the mind. Or Chittamatra, Chitta means mind, matra, not mantra. Matra means mere or only. In certain of the sutras, the Buddha said, all the three worlds are Chittamatra, are mere mind, only mind. And so there's a lot of debate about what his intention in saying that was. So the definition, we have these same 7 divisions. This is the first of the Mahayana schools, right? It's not like just a direct extension of the Sautrantikas, but some of the practitioners of the Sautrantika, like Dignaga and Dharmakirti, did have kind of a common heritage in those two traditions. The definition of a Chittamatran is a person who propounds Mahayana tenets, okay, and does not assert external objects, does not accept external objects, but asserts self-cognizers to be truly existent. Does not assert external objects, but asserts self-cognizers to be truly existent. So you would have to look at some of the other tenets later to see why they even have to say self-cognizers to be truly existent. Maybe there's some one of the Madhyamaka schools that is a propounder of Mahayana tenets, does not accept or assert external objects, but asserts self-cognizers as not truly existent. So this is being very, just trying to use as few words as possible to delineate who's talked about here. So we know already self-cognizers. Here it says, Chittamatra Vijnapti Vadin. Vijnapti Vadin. She says aspectarian. I don't believe that's the correct translation of that. And Yogacharan are mutually inclusive. These are different synonyms. One of the principal kind of precepts of the Chittamatra is that the Buddha taught in the first turning of the wheel, he taught that all phenomena basically are truly existent. Sounds like. And the second turning of the wheel, which was when? The day afterwards? The second teaching? When was the second turning of the wheel? Does anyone know?
It's not really a chronological thing.
Okay, well, rather than when, what? What was it? It's good.
That all external objects are not truly existent. Everything is not truly existent.
So the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, I think you're right, were the teachings that Buddha gave on the perfection of wisdom sutras, mainly at Rajagriha, like we say, Vulture's Peak. The Heart Sutra is one of the perfection of wisdom sutras. It's part of the second turning of the wheel. So it wasn't just one time. There is some sense of chronology that the Buddha did turn the first wheel of Dharma first, and then seemed to have turned the second wheel of Dharma, explained that to certain bodhisattvas that all phenomena were not truly existent. And then for those individuals who were of Mahayana tendencies who could not sort of grasp that all phenomena were not truly existent, he taught that some phenomena were truly existent and other phenomena were not truly existent in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. And one of the famous sutras of that is the delineation of the intention, the Samdi Nimorchana Sutra. Were you in Deer Park last summer, Venerable? Remember? Maybe some of the other teachings, the Samdi Nimorchana. How is that in Chinese? Do you know that text? What's the title in Chinese? Did you hear that? Can you say again? I can't emulate Venerable's Chinese, but it's a famous sutra also in the Chinese. So one of the main sutras that explains about the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. So according to this way of understanding, there are three kinds of phenomena. Those phenomena that are dependent, what we might call, literally are called other-powered, shenwang. Have you ever seen the Tibetan signs, rangwang, self-power, or like freedom? Like if you have autonomy, if you are able to have, if you're under your own power, you're autonomous, right? You're self-powered. So shenwang means phenomena that are not under their own power, that are dependent on causes and conditions. So we could say dependent phenomena. That's one category of phenomena. Another phenomena that are called the thoroughly established, which refers to, in the Chittamatra system, what they call emptiness. And then the third category of phenomena are the totally imaginary phenomena. That means to say what we would in other situations call just totally conceptual, totally conceived of, having no kind of basis outside. So three kinds of phenomena. For the Chittamatra, they said The first two, the dependent, the shenwang, and the thoroughly established emptiness, are truly existent. They truly exist. But the imaginary phenomena are not truly existent. So true existence for them is kind of implying some kind of status of reality. Dorji has a question. Something's permeating up.
I either need the text or need you to repeat that.
Okay, so I'm not sure that it will, maybe we'll talk a little bit here, but this is one of the main tenets of the Chittamatra, if you present it in another way. There are three kinds of phenomena. Those that are dependent, those that are...
Like dependent arisings?
That means they are phenomena that arise in dependence on causes and conditions.
Right.
So, for instance, depends on what you mean by dependent arisings. If you talk about dependent arisings as meaning dependent on causes and conditions, yeah, they're dependent arisings. If you mean they're dependent on their parts, they wouldn't be called. Not everything that depends on its parts is a dependent phenomena or a shenwang, because space depends on its parts. So there's different meanings of dependent arising. Here we just say that the first category are those phenomena that arise in dependence on causes and conditions. Another category of phenomena is the thoroughly established, which means the ultimate nature of phenomena. From their point of view, it has a particular meaning. It doesn't mean, they use the word emptiness, but here they mean an example of this thoroughly established phenomena is the fact that, let's say, this cup. Is this a mug or a cup? It's a mug. Okay. Venerable was so she's not even, no second thought. It's a mug. Excuse me.
Only thing I know.
Okay. It can't be called a cup. So you have to know this is a mug. Okay, Venerable. So the thoroughly established nature, all phenomena partake of these three natures. Thoroughly established nature is the fact that the cup and the consciousness perceiving the cup are devoid or empty of being different substances. Or as classically they say, blue and the blue apprehending consciousness are empty of being different substances. So Carrie has a nice dark blue shirt on. So my eye consciousness that perceives that is not a different substance from the blue of his shirt. So somehow this also implies that there are no external objects. When you say it that way, there are no external objects that are a different entity from the mind that perceives them. They say that the arisal of phenomena, what appear to be external phenomena and things within the mind, mental events, all arise because of imprints on a certain consciousness, we call it the eighth consciousness, the alaya vijnana. Have you heard of that before? The foundation of all, the consciousness foundation of all, alaya vijnana. Have you heard of that, Dorji?
I think I've heard that term before, but
Yeah.
I don't know what it
Alaya. Sounds like isn't there some Brazilian singer or something? Alaya? Isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Western.
Israeli.
Israeli, okay, there's an Israeli singer. It's not that one. Alaya. So the alaya is like the foundation upon which the imprints of our karma are stored. It's inattentive perception. That consciousness itself is not cognizant of itself. That's the foundation consciousness upon which these seeds are laid. And when they ripen, when the seed to experience a blue color ripens, also coincident, simultaneous with that, the seed of the consciousness perceiving that object also arises, so that they are part and parcel of the same consciousness. So that's why when they're talking about mind only, they're saying that the apparent externality of the world is an illusion.
Would that, according to their tenets, would that mean that there is no, that what seems to be form to us is actually consciousness?
So one has to investigate further what that means. It doesn't mean that form is consciousness, because form is form. They still say there are three categories of impermanent phenomena, which would be what? Form, consciousness, and non-associated compositional factors, right? But the appearance of form, they do accept form, and they do accept external, what appears to be external existence. But they say that anything that appears to be external and separated from the mind, because it seems that the subject consciousness is distant from and cut off from its perceived object in some cases, right? That they are different entities. Here it says that let's say the objects of consciousness, let's use the example that's often used, blue, color blue, and blue apprehending consciousness are empty of being different substances. So the other schools would say, well, yeah, the blue color exists as an external substance, external object. It definitely is a different substance than the substance of consciousness. For the Chittamatra, all is consciousness. All of these phenomena arise within the entity of consciousness. It doesn't mean that form is consciousness. Form is something else that arises because of the imprints, the latencies left on the alaya vijnana. So that Yongdrup, that second nature of phenomena, one nature is the dependent phenomena, dependent nature. Then Yongdrup, or the thoroughly established, and I can't remember what the Sanskrit name of that is, that refers to the fact that the dependent phenomena have this as their ultimate nature, that they don't arise, dependent phenomena do not arise as different entities from the minds that apprehend them. They are the same substance to those minds. The third nature is, let's say, one example of the imaginary is the conception that phenomena exist as external objects separate from the mind. That would be an imaginary phenomena. But there are other kinds of imaginary phenomena. Some that exist and some that do not exist. So maybe imaginary is not the perfect word for that. Thoroughly, what we say, kuntak, totally imputed, thoroughly, how do you say, thoroughly imputed, totally imputed. So some things exist, like space, non-compounded space, is that third category. It's thoroughly imputed, but it does exist.
You say phenomena is thoroughly
Not computed, imputed. I thought I'd misspoken, or that you'd heard computed. We've been talking about computers lately, so isn't it? So for the Chittamatra, the first two categories, the dependent, the shenwang, the other powered phenomena, which is what we usually conceive of as impermanent phenomena, that's truly existent. And the second category, the ultimate nature of phenomena, their emptiness, which they define in a very particular way. They're not talking about the emptiness of true existence. They say that phenomena, one meaning of it, there's another meaning which can be derived from it or sort of equivalent to it, but we'll talk about that later. Here we'll talk about just the common one that's understood, that phenomena are empty of being different substance from the consciousness that perceives them, so that there is not an external world that is a different nature from the mind, that is a different substance from the mind. Okay? There is, you could say there is external world, external existence, but not as a separate entity from the mind. Okay? So those are the three, sometimes called the three natures.
Excuse me, did you say the first two were truly existent?
Yeah, the first two are truly existent, and the last one is not truly existent. So somehow, again, we have to get our mind around the fact that these words are being used in different ways. From a Madhyamika point of view, no phenomena is truly existent. Both the Sautrantikas and the Prasangikas would say no phenomena are truly existent. And some kind of true existence is almost, from Nagarjuna's point of view, almost like denigrating, sort of like to imply that something is truly existent is a sign of lack of intelligence. But from here, some phenomena are truly, most of the phenomena that we consider that are important, the dependent phenomena and their ultimate nature, all of that is truly existent. The only thing that does not exist truly is the dependent nature. Okay, you've got your scratching your heads. Okay.
Object and subject, same seat.
So subject and object, the fact that subject and object, the object of that subject, the subject of that object, arise from same seeds, is related with the emptiness. There's another meaning of the emptiness, that the names of phenomena do not adhere inherently within the bases of the object named. That can be kind of supposedly derived from, is an equivalent level of subtlety to this kind of meaning of emptiness for the Chittamatra. So when the Chittamatra does use the word emptiness, but they use it in a different way than we've come to understand when we've studied in the Madhyamaka. Okay?
I have a stupid question. Should I save it till later?
So stupid question is definitely desired. Come on.
If you perceive a blue cup and I perceive a blue cup, and my mind is no different than the blue cup and your mind is no different than the blue cup, does that mean that our minds are no different? Is that a stupid question?
There's so when Lama Yeshe first taught the Westerners emptiness at Kopan, was there Omo? Were you? No. I can't remember when it was, 1976 or something. And everyone was waiting. Lama was going to teach emptiness. He was always teaching Lan Rim and explaining that emptiness was so profound. What he taught was I believe he taught Uttanamche, the Madhyanta Vibhanga by Maitreya, one of the 5 texts of Maitreya. That's the Chittamatra view of emptiness. If you ask John Landau, he helped to translate with Lama every day the lines of this. So one of the important things here is that we seem to think, because there's an external existence, there is some cup existing independent of Dorje's mind and my mind. But from the Chittamatra point of view, there is no external cup existing that is not the nature of one of our minds. So my perception of the cup is, in a sense, my cup, that is arisen because of the imprints on my consciousness. Some of them might be collective, like when we talk about collective karma, that's why we might see things that are similar. But everyone's perception is their own. There's no external reality existing as a separate entity from the mind. Now that, from certain, from the perspective of certain of the Madhyamaka schools, because one of the Madhyamaka schools is called the Yogacara Sautrantika. So there the word Yogacara is used. There's, in general, when we talk about the Madhyamaka, there's 2 mainly, Sautrantika and Prasangika. Have you heard before? And the Svatantra can be divided into the Sautrantika Svatantrika and the Yogacara Svatantrika. The Yogacara Svatantrika will have certain similarities to the Chittamatra or the Yogacharans. So, that there is no external reality and so forth other than the nature of the mind. So let's just go one step further here. This text doesn't talk so much about that right now. That's something that will come in other places. But just so you have a little background, here it divides them into the the true aspectarians and the false aspectarians. So this is something we'll have to get our minds around. Maybe if you can read next time. Have you heard about this before? The false true aspect Chittamatrans, or true aspectarians, and the false aspect Chittamatrans. So the definition of a true aspect Chittamatran is a Chittamatran who asserts that the part that appears as gross form to a form apprehending direct perceiver in an ordinary being's continuum is not polluted by the propensities of ignorance. You've all got that, right? So, what this is talking about is that all of the Chittamatrans, whether they call themselves false aspectarians or true aspectarians, would agree that there's certain imprints of ignorance in our consciousness that cause this appearance of externality to appear to us. That's due to certain imprints in our mind. And that's not true, that there is no such external existence. All of them would agree with that. But then there's another thing, not talking about external objects, there's an argument here, this is introducing a concept in philosophy also of gross object. Do gross objects exist?
Oh, from the Chittamatra.
Well, you're saying they do. Okay, I don't know what that means. Gross object. What is a gross object? What are we actually perceiving here? Is there a gross object that is comprised of individual parts? How when we perceive it, how are we perceiving it? So it's about this kind of question. So we'll talk more about that next time. But the true aspectarians. So they're saying what? Definition of a true aspectarian is a Chittamatran who asserts that part of the appearance, because there's certain part of the appearance that appears to be cut off and separate from us and a different entity from the consciousness. We're not talking about that part of the appearance. But the part of the appearance of gross form, something being a gross form that's comprised of atoms and so forth. Well, eventually we would assume it's comprised of atoms, but it looks like a gross form. That part of the appearance that appears that way to a form apprehending direct perceiver, so that means, let's say, to an eye consciousness, in an ordinary being's continuum, that appearance is not polluted by the imprints of ignorance, that is not influenced by the imprints of ignorance. So in other words, that's the way it is. What it's perceiving is a true aspect.
What you see is what you get.
Whizzygig, what is it? Whizzygig, what you see is what you get.
So that would be a valid cognizant to aspectarian?
Something to investigate. Something to investigate whether that's a valid cognizer for them.
Thanks.
The definition of a false aspect Chittamatran, is a Chittamatran who asserts that the part of the appearance that appears as gross form to a form apprehending direct perceiver in an ordinary being's continuum is polluted by the propensities of ignorance. And there are, we'll go over this a little, obviously more next time. There are three types of true aspectarians. Those that propound that when you have, let's say, a color, like the color of a peacock's feather, or like, say, this table. If I'm looking at this table with my eye, there are many colors, multicolors, presenting themselves to my eye consciousness at one time, right? So there's some true aspectarians who say that there are just as many subjective aspects as there are objective aspects. Whatever presents itself to the mind, whatever number of aspects, they're equal in number to the subjective aspects. How do they call it here? Equal number of subjects and objects. There are those that are called half-egists. I like that. Do we have anything in English like that? What is it? Sounds like some word in English. Do we have something?
I don't think you want to say it.
Whoa. Sorry. Oh, yes. Very clever. Okay. I've got one pun for you later. Okay. And non-pluralists. Each has its own manner of asserting. It is said that the proponents of equal numbers of subjects and objects assert that when a visual consciousness apprehending the various colors of the wing of a butterfly apprehends the various colors, from the object side an aspect of each color, each different color, blue, yellow, and so forth, appears, and also from the subject side a consciousness is produced that apprehends aspect of each different color accordingly. So equal in number to the number of colors. The half-egists assert that when the various colors are apprehended from the object side, so there'll be different colors coming, an aspect of each color appears, but from the subject side, a consciousness is produced that does not apprehend the aspect of each individual color accordingly, but just the pattern itself. So one side there's many things, the other side there's one. Just one aspect, the mottled color. The non-pluralists assert that when the various colors are apprehended from the object side, an aspect of each color does not appear, but the aspect of a mere conglomeration appears, and from the subject side, a consciousness apprehending the aspect of each color is not produced, but a consciousness apprehending the mere conglomeration or mottle is produced. So you could think about it. There are three different ways that could be happening like that. So there are three kinds of true aspectarians. And there are two divisions of the false aspectarians. Those that are called tainted false aspectarians and those that are called untainted false aspectarians. So that these imprints that cause this false aspect to appear, because the true aspectarians say that it's not a false aspect, so it's a true aspect, that the taints, the imprints that cause them can be eliminated, or others say that cannot be eliminated, that there'll always be this sense even at the ground of Buddhahood. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. So why don't you read ahead, and I'll just mention here, etymology. If someone asks why they are called Chittamatrans, or mind only, they're called mind only, Chittamatra, because they assert that phenomena are merely in the nature of consciousness. And they are called, here she says aspectarians, but it's not that, it's namrikpa, this vijnapti matra, because they assert that all phenomena are in the nature of consciousness. She says aspect. This is a misunderstanding. Namrik doesn't mean nam of namrik doesn't mean aspect. It's namparikpa. The prefix of the Sanskrit word vijnapti is nampar. It's a superlative, or when you say something very, it's namparikpa, namrikpa. So she's taken it as meaning another meaning of nam, meaning aspect. It doesn't mean that here. So it's just are in the nature of consciousness. Okay, so getting something to chew on. What do you think? Understanding something? And let's dedicate the merits. Both listening and teaching the Dharma create merit, especially if motivated. We try to create a special motivation at the beginning. So definitely we've created more merit in this period than we might otherwise just walking down the street or going to the bookstore or whatever we might be doing with ordinary mundane motivations. So try to dedicate these merits as the many different kinds of dedications that you know or have heard of. So hundreds of millions, tens of millions of prayers, as is said in the King of Prayers. But particularly to think, due to these merits, may I quickly develop the bodhicitta, this altruistic, loving mind, which has not yet developed, and may that which has been developed in my own mind or in other beings' continua, due to these merits, may that seedling, that sprout that has developed, not decline, but increase ever bigger. Due to these merits that we've created this evening. And try to seal it in the emptiness of the three spheres, the merits dedicated, the object dedicated to, and the act of dedication are all empty of existing the way that they appear as somehow findable within their bases of designation, merely imputed by the mind. There is no self, the way that it appears to the mind. There is no merits. There are no merits. There is no goal, the way that it appears to the mind, yet they all function on the level of conventional reality. There's no lack of connection between cause and effect.